On Thanksgiving Day, I arrived at my daughter's house unannounced and saw my granddaughter shivering outside in 15-degree weather, wearing only a thin sweater and jeans. Inside, the whole family was sitting at the holiday table, enjoying turkey and laughing in the warmth. Enraged by their betrayal, I kicked down the door and uttered 6 words that made their faces turn pale. But that was only the beginning of the justice that changed their lives forever. My phone buzzed against the dashboard. A text from my neighbor. Saw police cars at the Johnsons again. Domestic situation. Made me think of you and your family worries. I stared at those words while my old Buick idled in the driveway. The Johnsons. George used to worry about their granddaughter too, back when he was still alive to worry about anything at all. Now it was just me and that gnawing feeling in my gut whenever I thought about Leona's marriage. The clock read 2:30 p.m. time to go. I shifted into reverse and backed out onto Oakwood Drive. Snow had started falling an hour ago, fat flakes that stuck to everything and made the roads treacherous. The radio crackled with weather warnings as I turned onto I-94 south toward Detroit. I switched to the soul station, same one George and I always listened to. Aretha Franklin was singing something powerful that matched my mood. The passenger seat held 2 gift bags. One with a new leather journal for Aliyah, genuine leather that cost me more than I wanted to spend. The other had graphic novels, the kind with strong heroines she'd been reading since she was 12. Now 18, she probably thought she was too old for them, but I remembered being 18. You're never too old for heroes. Family is all we have left, George used to say when he'd catch me grumbling about holiday visits. He'd been right then, and he was right now, even though his voice only existed in my memory. After losing him 6 months ago, every gathering felt precious and fragile. The windshield wipers struggled against the accumulating snow. Other cars crawled along at half the speed limit, hazard lights blinking like nervous fireflies. I kept both hands on the wheel and maintained a steady 40 miles per hour. No point arriving at all if I ended up in a ditch. Exit signs counted down the miles to Detroit. I tried calling Leona's house, wanted to let them know I was coming, maybe surprise them less dramatically than just showing up. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Strange. Usually someone was home on Thanksgiving afternoon. A gas station appeared through the snow, bright fluorescent lights cutting through the gray afternoon like a lighthouse. I pulled in, filled the tank, and went inside to grab some coffee and a bag of those peppermints Aliyah liked. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, shook her head at the weather. Roads are getting worse by the hour, she said, scanning my items. You driving far? Just to Detroit. Family dinner. Be careful out there. Saw 3 accidents already today. Back in the truck, I checked the time again. 3:05 p.m. The drive usually took 45 minutes, but today it would be closer to an hour. I thought about Aliyah, probably helping her mother in the kitchen, maybe watching football with Simone. The girl had grown so much since summer when we went fishing at Lake Huron. Caught her first base that day, grinned like she'd won the lottery. That's when I'd noticed the bruise on her arm. When I asked about it, she'd gotten quiet, said something about falling off her bike, but the mark looked wrong. Too precise, too much like fingers. I should have pressed harder, should have asked more questions. George would have known what to do. The snow kept falling as I took exit 15 toward Leona's neighborhood. Suburban streets lined with 2-story houses, each one decorated with pumpkins and autumn wreaths. Christmas lights were already going up on some of them, twinkling through the white curtain of snow. I turned into Riverside Heights subdivision, driving slowly past houses where families were probably gathered around dining tables, sharing stories and passing dishes. Warm light spilled from windows, creating golden rectangles on snow-covered lawns. This was supposed to be a good day, a healing day. George would have wanted that. Leona's street appeared ahead, and I could see her house at the end of the block. The blue 2-story with white shutters, Simone's SUV in the driveway next to her sedan. Smoke rose from the chimney, and holiday decorations covered the front porch. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. I slowed the truck as I approached, already imagining the surprise on their faces when I knocked on the door. Maybe Aliyah would run to hug me like she used to when she was smaller. Maybe this Thanksgiving would be the start of healing our family, the way George always dreamed it could be. I pulled into the driveway behind Simone's SUV, the engine ticking as it cooled. Through the falling snow, I could see holiday lights twinkling around the front door and hear faint music from inside the house. Something warm and inviting, like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Then I saw her. Aliyah sat on the front steps, hunched over with her arms wrapped around her knees. No coat, no hat, just a thin long-sleeved sweater and jeans already dusted with snow. Her shoulders shook, not just from cold, but something deeper. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, throwing open the truck door. The wind hit me like a slap, carrying ice crystals that stung my face. In the few seconds it took me to reach her, I could see her lips had turned blue and her hands were pressed tight against her body, trying to conserve warmth. "Aliyah," I called out, breaking into a run across the slippery driveway. "What are you doing out here?" She looked up, and the relief in her eyes nearly broke my heart. Her face was pale, almost gray, with red patches on her cheeks where the cold had bitten deepest. "Grandma." Her voice came out as barely a whisper, teeth chattering so hard she could barely form words. I can't." I was already pulling off my heavy winter coat, wrapping it around her shoulders before she could finish the sentence. The girl was ice cold, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "What do you mean you can't?" "Can't what?" I helped her stand, steadying her when her legs nearly buckled. "How long have you been sitting out here?" "I'm not allowed." She pulled my coat tighter around herself, and I could feel her shaking through the thick fabric. "I'm not allowed to go in the house." The words hit me like a physical blow. Behind us, through the brightly lit windows, I could hear laughter and the sound of a television. The warm glow of family celebration while my granddaughter sat freezing on the front steps like some kind of punishment. "What do you mean, not allowed?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but anger was building in my chest like a fire. "This is your home." Aliyah flinched at my tone, and I immediately softened it. The last thing she needed was another adult yelling at her. "Please don't make it worse for me," she whispered, glancing nervously at the front door. "Please, Grandma, if Simone hears you." I looked at the house. Really looked at it. The decorations, the warm lights, the sounds of celebration. Then I looked at my granddaughter, blue-lipped and shivering in clothes that wouldn't keep her warm in 50-degree weather, let alone this near-freezing nightmare. "How long, Aliyah?" I kept my voice gentle but firm. "How long have you been out here?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. Since this morning." "This morning." I checked my watch. 3:15. "Baby, it's below freezing out here. You could get frostbite, could." I stopped myself before I scared her worse than she already was. I tried the front door handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. They'd locked her out of her own home on Thanksgiving Day and left her to freeze while they enjoyed their holiday dinner. "We need to get you warm," I said, guiding her toward my truck. "Come on, let's get you in the cab where there's heat." But even as I moved to protect her, my mind was working, cataloging details. The way she'd flinched when I raised my voice. The bruises I'd noticed during our fishing trip. The careful way she moved, like someone who'd learned to make herself small and invisible. This wasn't the first time. This was a pattern. "Aliyah," I said as I helped her into the passenger seat and turned the heat to maximum. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened today." I cranked the heat to full blast and wrapped another blanket from my emergency kit around Aliyah's shoulders. Her hands were so numb she couldn't grip anything properly, so I held them between mine, trying to rub warmth back into her fingers. "Talk to me, baby," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "What happened this morning?" She stared down at her hands, still shaking. "I was helping Mom with the turkey. She asked me to check on it while she took a shower." Her voice was small, ashamed. I forgot to turn off the oven timer when I took it out to baste it. You forgot a timer? The turkey got a little burnt on top. Not ruined, just darker than usual. She finally looked at me, and I could see the fear in her eyes. Simone came in and saw it, and she lost it. I felt my jaw clench. Lost it how? Started yelling about how I'd ruined the whole holiday. Said the guests would think Mom couldn't cook, that I was an embarrassment to the family. Aliyah pulled the blanket tighter. Then she said I needed to think about my actions and that I couldn't come back inside until I'd learned some responsibility. And your mother? The question came out harder than I intended. Aliyah looked away. She tried to say something at first, but Simone told her to stay out of it. Said this was between her and me. She swallowed hard. She didn't say anything after that. I checked my watch again. 3:20. Aliyah, what time did this happen? Around 11 this morning. 4.5 hours. 4.5 hours in weather that could kill someone, over a slightly burnt turkey that probably tasted just fine. I had to take several deep breaths before I could speak without shouting. Has this happened before? The question hung in the air between us. I could see her wrestling with whether to tell me the truth, probably weighing the consequences of honesty against the relief of finally having someone to tell. Sometimes, she whispered, when I mess up. Last month she made me stand in the garage all night because I forgot to take out the trash. And once she locked me in the basement for 2 days because I accidentally broke one of her wine glasses. Each word felt like a punch to my gut. I looked at my granddaughter, this smart, kind girl who'd never hurt anyone in her life, and saw the careful way she held herself, like someone who'd learned that taking up too much space could be dangerous. Your mother knows about this? She says Simone's just trying to teach me discipline, that I need to be more responsible. Her voice cracked. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am just. Don't. I turned in the seat to face her fully. Don't you dare blame yourself for this. What that woman is doing to you isn't discipline. It's abuse. And it's going to stop today. Aliyah's eyes went wide with panic. No, Grandma, please. If you make a scene, she'll just take it out on me later. She always does. I could see the house through the windshield, still glowing warm and inviting, still full of laughter and holiday music. Inside, my daughter was serving dinner to guests while her wife's stepdaughter sat freezing in a truck, too afraid to ask for basic human decency. Listen to me, I said, taking her hands again. You are 18 years old. You don't have to live like this anymore, and I'm not going to let you. But where would I go? I don't have any money. I can't afford college without. You'll come home with me tonight. The decision crystallized as I spoke. We'll figure out the rest later. I could see the hope and terror warring in her expression. Hope because maybe finally someone was going to stand up for her. Terror because she'd learned not to trust that things could actually get better. She won't let me leave, Aliyah said quietly. She'll call the police, say I stole something, or that you're kidnapping me. I looked at the house again, at the warm lights and holiday decorations, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. George had always been the diplomatic one, the one who smoothed over family conflicts with patience and understanding. But George wasn't here anymore, and diplomacy hadn't protected my granddaughter from 4 hours in near-freezing weather. Let me worry about Simone, I said, opening the truck door. Right now, we're going to get your things. I stepped out into the snow, my boots crunching on the accumulating white. Behind me, I heard Aliyah scramble to follow, my coat still wrapped around her shoulders. The front door was still locked, but I had no intention of knocking. I held Aliyah closer, but my hands weren't just shaking from the cold anymore. They were shaking with the kind of rage that builds slowly, then hits like a freight train when you finally see the whole picture. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? I asked, studying her face more carefully. Now that I was really looking, I could see faint bruises along her jawline, partially hidden by the shadows and cold-reddened skin. I tried to hint, she whispered, pulling my coat tighter. But you always talk to Mom, and she. The memory hit me like a slap. Last month when Aliyah had called while I was fixing dinner. Her voice small and uncertain. Grandma, Simone says I can't eat dinner with them anymore. Says I have to earn my way back to the table. I'd laughed it off, thought it was teenage drama. Called Leona the next day and she'd brushed it aside with that practiced ease she developed since marrying Simone. Mom, you're overreacting. It's just normal family discipline. Aliyah exaggerates everything. You know how teenagers are. Another memory surfaced. Summer phone call. Aliyah sounding exhausted. Grandma, Simone yelled at me again about leaving dishes in the sink. She made me wash every dish in the house twice. When I'd asked Leona about it later, she'd sighed that martyred sigh. She's just being dramatic. Simone's trying to teach her responsibility. How long has she been treating you like this? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would destroy me. Since Mom married her 3 years ago. Aliyah's voice was barely audible. It started small, making me redo chores if they weren't perfect. Then it got worse. I remembered the fishing trip this past summer, how Aliyah had seemed reluctant to go home, kept asking if we could stay another day. When I'd pressed her about it, she just shrugged and said she liked being on the lake. But now I could see it differently. The way she'd grown quiet when I mentioned driving her back. The shadow that crossed her face when she talked about school starting. The basement incident, I said, the pieces clicking together. You mentioned sleeping in the garage. How many times? More than I want to count. She was looking at her hands now, and I could see the shame she carried. Last winter she locked me out for forgetting to shovel the driveway. I slept in your truck when you visited for Christmas Eve. My truck. She'd slept in my truck on Christmas Eve while I was inside enjoying eggnog and thinking what a wonderful family holiday we were having. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I looked toward the house where warm light spilled from every window and I could hear the faint sound of laughter. A perfect suburban holiday scene while my granddaughter nearly froze to death on the front steps. Your mother knows about all of this? Aliyah nodded miserably. She says Simone's just trying to make me a better person, that I need to stop being so sensitive and learn to follow rules. The rage was building now, hot and focused. I could feel it in my chest, in the way my vision seemed to sharpen and narrow. George used to warn me about my temper, told me to count to 10 before acting when I got like this. But George wasn't here, and counting wouldn't help my granddaughter. I stood up, still keeping Aliyah wrapped in my coat. Come on, we're going inside. Grandma, no. Please, if you make a scene, she'll just what? I turned to face her fully. Make you sleep outside in freezing weather? Beat you? Starve you? I could hear my voice getting harder. Baby, it can't get much worse than what's already happening. Aliyah looked toward the front door with fear in her eyes. You don't understand how she gets when someone challenges her. But I was already walking toward the house, my granddaughter following reluctantly behind me. The front door looked solid and expensive, Simone's pride showing in every detail of her perfect suburban fortress. I didn't bother knocking. My boot hit the door just beside the lock with all the force I could muster. 68 years old, but decades of factory work had left me with more strength than most women half my age. The wood splintered with a crack that echoed through the neighborhood, and the door slammed open so hard it bounced off the wall. The warm air rushed out to meet us, carrying the smell of roasted turkey and the sound of shocked silence. I stepped into the entryway, Aliyah close behind me, and took in the scene that stopped me cold. The dining room table was set like something from a magazine. White tablecloth, candles flickering, crystal glasses catching the light. Simone sat at the head of the table in a pressed silk blouse, carving knife in hand. Leona was beside her in a green dress I'd never seen before, her hair perfectly styled. A younger boy, maybe 10 years old, sat across from them with a fork full of mashed potatoes halfway to his mouth. They were all frozen mid-motion, like someone had hit pause on their perfect holiday moment. The contrast hit me like a physical blow. Here they sat, warm and comfortable, enjoying their feast, while Aliyah had been shivering outside for over 4 hours. The turkey looked golden and beautiful, probably the replacement for the one Aliyah had supposedly ruined. Everything was pristine, peaceful, exactly what a family Thanksgiving should look like. Everything except the fact that they'd left a child outside to freeze. Have you completely lost your minds? My voice boomed through the room, and the little boy dropped his fork with a clatter. Leona's face went white as paper, and the serving spoon in her hand hit the table, sending gravy spattering across the white cloth. Mom. Leona's voice came out as a squeak. What are you doing here? How did you? While you're sitting here feasting like royalty, that girl was freezing outside. I pointed directly at Aliyah, who was still wrapped in my coat and shivering despite the warm air. 4 hours. Leona. 4 hours in weather that could have killed her. Simone slowly set down her carving knife and rose from her chair. She was taller than I remembered, probably had me by a few inches, but I'd been in my share of confrontations when I was younger. Size didn't always matter when you were angry enough. Who gave you permission to enter my house? Her voice was controlled but dangerous, the tone of someone who wasn't used to being challenged. This is private property, and you're trespassing. I could see her taking my measure, calculating whether she could intimidate me into backing down. Her shoulders squared, and she moved around the table toward us with the predatory confidence of someone who ruled her own domain. Private property? I stepped forward to meet her. You mean the property where you locked my granddaughter outside to freeze while you ate dinner? The younger son started crying, confused and frightened by the shouting. Leona reached over to comfort him, but her eyes never left my face. I could see the conflict there, torn between protecting her mother and defending her wife. This is a private family matter, Simone said, her voice rising. And you have no business. No business. I could feel the heat rising in my face. That's my granddaughter you nearly killed with your private family matter. Behind me, Aliyah pressed closer, and I could feel her trembling, not just from cold now, but from fear of what was about to happen. This was probably the first time anyone had ever stood up to Simone in her own house, and we all knew it was about to get ugly. The holiday music was still playing softly in the background, some cheerful song about gratitude and family togetherness. The irony would have been funny if I weren't so furious I could barely see straight. I pointed directly at Aliyah, my finger steady despite the rage coursing through me. Look at her, Simone. Really look at what you've done. Simone crossed her arms and lifted her chin, every inch the woman who believed she was justified in her actions. The girl ruined our holiday. She needed to learn a lesson about responsibility and consequences. A lesson. I could barely believe what I was hearing. You nearly froze a child to death over a slightly burnt turkey. She's 18, not a child. And this is my house with my rules. Simone's voice took on that patronizing tone people use when they think they're being reasonable. I'm trying to teach her discipline, something her mother obviously failed to do in her first 17 years. Leona flinched at that but didn't say anything. Just sat there in her green dress, looking between us like she was watching a tennis match instead of a fight for her daughter's welfare. Discipline. I stepped closer to the table, close enough to see the grease on Simone's plate, the wine stain on her lips. That's called child abuse, and you're lucky I don't call the police right now. Child abuse. Simone actually laughed, a cold sound that made my skin crawl. She forgot to turn off a timer and ruined a $20 turkey. I sent her outside to think about her actions. That's not abuse, that's parenting. 4 hours in 15-degree weather. She's being dramatic, just like always. Simone waved her hand dismissively, like she was shooing away a fly. Look at her. She's fine. A little cold never hurt anyone. I looked at Aliyah, still wrapped in my coat, her lips blue and her whole body shaking. Fine. This woman thought hypothermia was fine. Mom, please. Leona finally spoke up, her voice shaky. Don't ruin our holiday. We can discuss this later, as a family. Ruin your holiday? I turned to stare at my daughter. Your daughter was sitting outside freezing while you ate dinner, and you're worried about me ruining your holiday? She looked down at her plate, unable to meet my eyes. Simone was she was trying to teach Aliyah responsibility. Sometimes girls need firm guidance. Firm guidance. My voice cracked with disbelief. Leona, when you were 18 and you dented my car, did I lock you outside in a blizzard? When you failed your math test, did I make you sleep in the garage? That's different, she whispered. How? How is it different? Simone stepped between us, her face red with anger. Because this is my house, and Aliyah is not my biological daughter. I have every right to discipline her as I see fit. There it was. The truth finally out in the open. Aliyah wasn't her blood, so Aliyah didn't matter. The girl was nothing more than an inconvenience to be controlled and punished. You have 30 seconds to apologize to my granddaughter, I said, my voice deadly quiet. 30 seconds to show some basic human decency. Simone's laugh was even colder this time. I don't owe that girl anything. If she doesn't like my rules, she can find somewhere else to live. The little boy was crying harder now, and Leona was making shushing noises, but I could barely hear them. All I could see was Simone's smug face. All I could think about was Aliyah sitting on those steps for 4 hours, believing she deserved it. Somewhere else to live. I stepped even closer, close enough to smell the wine on Simone's breath. You're right about that. She is going somewhere else to live. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my cell phone, my thumb hovering over the keypad. The movement was deliberate, slow enough for everyone in the room to understand exactly what I was considering. Simone's face changed when she saw the phone. The smug confidence cracked just slightly around the edges. Either you apologize to my granddaughter right now, I said, my voice deadly calm, or I call Child Protective Services and report this abuse. You wouldn't dare. Simone stepped closer, trying to use her size to intimidate me. But I'd faced down bigger women than her in my day, and I wasn't backing down from anyone who hurt my family. Try me. I started dialing the first number. I've got plenty to tell them about leaving an 18-year-old outside in freezing weather for 4 hours. Behind me, Aliyah gripped my arm. I could feel her trembling, but not from cold anymore. This was fear of a different kind, the terror of someone who'd learned that standing up only made things worse. Mom, please. Leona finally moved, stepping between us with her hands raised like she was trying to stop a bar fight. Don't destroy our family over this. I'm not destroying anything. I kept my eyes locked on Simone. She did that when she decided to abuse my granddaughter. Abuse. Simone's laugh was harsh and bitter. I was teaching her responsibility, something her weak mother never bothered to do. Leona flinched like she'd been slapped, but she didn't defend herself. Just stood there taking it, the way she probably always did. Get out of my house, old woman. Simone continued, her voice rising. You have no authority here. Aliyah is my responsibility now. Your responsibility. I looked around the perfect dining room, the crystal glasses, the fine china, the holiday centerpiece, then back at my granddaughter's bruised face. Is this how you handle responsibility? Locking children outside to freeze. The younger son was crying harder now, confused and frightened by the shouting. Leona moved to comfort him but kept glancing between me and Simone like she was watching a tennis match where someone might die. She's not a child, she's 18, Simone said, straightening her shoulders. And in my house, adults who can't follow simple instructions face adult consequences. Adult consequences for forgetting to turn off a timer? Adult consequences for being careless and destructive, for ruining our holiday and embarrassing family in front of our guests. Simone gestured toward the empty chairs where other family members had obviously been sitting before I arrived. Everyone had to leave because of the scene she caused. I looked at those empty chairs and felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. They'd had guests. People had been here eating dinner and socializing while Aliyah sat outside freezing. And none of them had questioned it. None of them had said a word. "Grandma, let's just go," Aliyah whispered behind me. "Please, I don't want to cause any more problems." The defeat in her voice broke something inside me. This girl, this smart, kind young woman, had been beaten down so thoroughly that she thought she was the problem, that she was causing trouble by asking for basic human decency. "You're not causing problems, baby," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You never were." I turned back to Simone, my decision crystallizing like ice in my veins. "You have 30 seconds to apologize to my granddaughter for what you did today." "I'm not apologizing for anything." Simone crossed her arms, chin raised in defiance. "And I'm certainly not taking orders from some bitter old woman who can't accept that her precious granddaughter needed discipline." "Then we're done here." I closed the phone and put it back in my pocket. "Aliyah, go get your things. You're coming home with me." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the little boy stopped crying for a moment. "You can't just take her," Leona said, her voice barely a whisper. "Watch me." I placed my hand firmly on Aliyah's shoulder, guiding her away from the dining room table and toward the stairs. "Go pack whatever you need. We're leaving." "Mom, you can't do this." Leona followed us, her voice rising with panic. "You can't just walk into our house and take my daughter." "I can, and I am." I kept walking, staying between Aliyah and the rest of the family. "Unless you'd prefer I call the authorities and let them sort it out." Aliyah led the way up the narrow staircase to the second floor, her steps quick and uncertain. I could hear Simone behind us, her heavy footsteps on the hardwood, but I didn't turn around. "This is kidnapping," Simone called out. "I'll have you arrested for kidnapping." Good luck explaining to the police why my granddaughter was sitting outside in 15-degree weather for 4 hours. I reached the top of the stairs and followed Aliyah down a short hallway to a small room at the back of the house. The room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, no heat vent that I could see, and the single window faced north, letting in the coldest air. It looked more like a storage room than a bedroom, and it was clearly the worst room in the house. "This is where you sleep?" I asked, taking in the sparse furnishings and bare walls. Aliyah nodded, already pulling clothes from the dresser and stuffing them into a duffel bag. "Simone says the basement room is for guests and the other upstairs room is for my brother." I noticed she didn't say our brother, just my brother. Even in her own home, she was an outsider. "Take everything that matters to you," I said, standing guard at the doorway while she packed. "We're not coming back for anything. Aliyah, think about what you're doing." Leona appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. "This is your home, your family." "Some family," Aliyah muttered, folding a Wayne State University sweatshirt into her bag. "Real families don't lock each other outside to freeze." "Simone was just trying to teach you responsibility." "By giving me hypothermia?" Aliyah looked up at her mother, and I could see 3 years of hurt and disappointment in her eyes. "Mom, she made me sleep in the garage last week because I left a glass in the sink." "A glass? That's not normal," Aliyah said quietly, zipping up her bag. "And you know it." Leona's face crumpled. She has high standards. She wants you to be better. She wants me gone," Aliyah said quietly. "And you know it." We made our way back downstairs, Simone waiting at the bottom like a bouncer. "You leave my house, girl, and you don't come back. Ever." "Fine by me," Aliyah said, and I heard real strength in her voice for the first time all day. The front door was still hanging open from when I'd kicked it in, cold air pouring into the house and making the holiday decorations flutter like dying leaves. I could see my truck in the driveway, engine still running, exhaust visible in the frigid air. "Aliyah," Leona called out as we reached the door. "Please don't do this. I love you." She stopped, turned back to look at her mother one last time. "If you loved me, Mom, you wouldn't have let this happen." We walked to my truck in silence, our breath visible in the freezing air. I threw her bag in the bed and helped her into the passenger seat, then walked around to the driver's side. Through the front window of the house, I could see the family still standing in the entryway. Leona crying, Simone red-faced with rage, the little boy peeking around the corner. "You ready?" I asked, putting the truck in reverse. "I've been ready for 3 years," Aliyah said, pulling my coat tighter around her shoulders. I backed out of the driveway and onto the street, past the other decorated houses where normal families were probably finishing their Thanksgiving dinners in peace. The radio was still playing soul music, the heater was working perfectly, and for the first time since I'd arrived, Aliyah looked like she could actually breathe. "Thank you, Grandma," she said quietly as we turned onto the main road toward the highway. "I can't believe you came for me." "I should have come sooner," I said, meaning every word. "I should have seen what was happening. I tried to tell you, but I didn't know how." We drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the familiar weight of family responsibility settling around my shoulders like George's favorite blanket. This girl needed protection, needed a safe place to heal and grow into the woman she was meant to become. "Tell me about college," I said as we merged onto I-94 North. "What are you studying?" "Engineering." Her voice got stronger when she talked about school. "Mechanical engineering, like you used to do at the factory." "Like grandmother, like granddaughter." I smiled, thinking about George and how proud he would have been. "We'll figure out the tuition. Don't worry about that." "Grandma, I don't want to be a burden." "Baby, you're not a burden. You're family, and family takes care of each other." My driveway looked smaller than usual with both trucks parked side by side, but the house itself seemed to glow with welcome as we approached. I'd left the porch light on out of habit, and now I was grateful for that small beacon cutting through the winter darkness. "Home sweet home," I said, helping Aliyah carry her bag to the front door. The key turned easily in the lock, and warm air rushed out to greet us as we stepped inside. The house smelled like coffee and the lingering scent of George's cologne. It wasn't much, a modest ranch with worn furniture and carpet that had seen better days, but it was paid for and it was ours. "You remember where the guest room is?" I asked, flipping on lights as we moved through the living room. "Yeah, down the hall next to your room." Aliyah looked around with obvious relief. "It's so warm in here. Thermostat set to 72 year-round. Your grandfather always said life was too short to be cold in your own house." I showed her to the guest room and helped her get settled. "There are extra blankets in the closet if you need them." The room was simple but comfortable. A double bed with one of the quilts from my church's quilting circle, a dresser, and a reading chair by the window. Photos of family gatherings lined the walls, including several of Aliyah at various ages. This had always been her room when she visited, and seeing her here now felt right in a way that nothing had felt right since George died. "I'll get some dinner started," I said. "Nothing fancy. I've got chicken in the freezer and some vegetables that need using up." "Can I help?" she asked, and I could see how desperately she wanted to be useful, to earn her keep. "Sure, but you don't have to. This is your home now, not a job." We worked together in the kitchen, and gradually the day's tension began to leave Aliyah's shoulders. I thawed the chicken in the microwave while she washed vegetables, and we moved around each other with the easy rhythm of family members who'd cooked together before. "Tell me more about what's been happening," I said as I seasoned the chicken. "Start from the beginning, when your mother married Simone." Aliyah was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to decide how much to share. "It started small. Little comments about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong or left my shoes in the wrong place. Then it got bigger." "How much bigger?" "She controls everything. When I eat, what I eat, when I can shower, when I can use the phone." Aliyah's voice got smaller as she continued. "She made Mom choose between her and me. And she chose her." I had to stop seasoning the chicken for a moment and grip the counter. "What do you mean she chose her?" "Last Christmas when you visited, remember how I was quiet during dinner? Simone had told me I wasn't allowed to speak unless someone asked me a direct question, and Mom didn't say anything to stop her. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd thought Aliyah was just being a typical moody teenager. I'd even joked with George about it later, saying kids these days didn't know how to make conversation. Why doesn't your mother stand up to her? She's scared. Aliyah started chopping carrots with mechanical precision. She told me once that if she leaves Simone, she'll lose the house and have to move back to that apartment complex where we used to live. She can't afford to take care of us on her own. I slid the chicken into the oven and started a fire in the living room fireplace. The familiar ritual of wadding newspaper and stacking kindling helped calm my racing thoughts. "Come sit with me," I said when the fire was crackling steadily. "Tell me about the good things. Tell me about school, about your friends." We settled into the comfortable chairs by the fire, and for the first time all day, Aliyah smiled. "I made Dean's List last semester. And I've got this friend, Mia, who's teaching me to play guitar. Your grandfather always wanted to learn guitar." I pointed to a framed photo on the mantel showing George at age 20, laughing and holding an acoustic guitar. He said music was the language of the soul. I remember him saying that. Aliyah studied the photo with new interest. "I miss him." "Me too, baby. Me too." We talked until the chicken was done, sharing memories of George and making plans for Aliyah's spring semester. The house felt alive again with conversation and laughter, the way it used to when George was here to fill the quiet spaces. As we sat down to eat our simple but satisfying meal, I looked across the table at my granddaughter. Really looked at her. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. "We'll call the college tomorrow," I said, cutting into my chicken. "Make sure your financial aid is sorted out, and we'll look into getting you a part-time job if you want one." "Grandma, you don't have to do all this for me." "Yes, I do." I met her eyes across the table. "That's what family's for." The phone rang just as we were finishing dessert, leftover pie I'd found in the freezer. The sound cut through our peaceful evening like a knife, and I could see Aliyah tense up immediately. I looked at the caller ID and felt my jaw clench. Leona. The peaceful crackling of the fireplace was shattered by 3 sharp knocks on the front door. Not the gentle rapping of a neighbor or the hesitant tap of someone unsure. This was the authoritative pounding of someone who expected immediate compliance. Aliyah nearly dropped her coffee mug. "Grandma." "Stay behind me," I said, setting down my own cup and moving toward the door. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, accompanied by the sound of multiple voices on my front porch. I flipped on the porch light and looked through the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers stood on my doorstep, and behind them, like predators waiting for their moment to strike, were Simone and Leona. "Mrs. Burke," the lead officer called out. "Police. We need to speak with you." I took a deep breath and opened the door, keeping my body positioned to block their view of Aliyah. "What can I do for you, officers?" Simone immediately stepped forward, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "Officer, this woman kidnapped my stepdaughter. She broke into our house and took the girl without permission." The lead officer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, held up his hand to quiet Simone. "Ma'am, we need to sort out this situation. Mrs. Burke, is there a young woman named Aliyah Green on these premises?" "Yes," I said simply. "My granddaughter is here." "She kidnapped her." Simone's voice rose dramatically. "Broke down our door like some kind of criminal and dragged the girl away from her family." "Is the young woman here voluntarily?" the second officer asked, pulling out a notepad. Before I could answer, Aliyah appeared beside me, still wrapped in the blanket from the couch. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I want to stay with my grandma." Simone's face flushed red. "See. She's been filling the girl's head with lies, turning her against her own family." "What lies?" I stepped forward slightly. "The truth about how you left her outside in freezing weather for 4 hours? The truth about how you've been abusing her for 3 years. Abuse." Simone laughed, but it sounded forced. "I was teaching her responsibility. The girl ruined our entire Thanksgiving dinner and needed to learn there are consequences for her actions. The first officer looked between us with the weary expression of someone who'd broken up too many family disputes. Mrs. Burke, we're going to need everyone to come inside so we can discuss this properly. I stepped back reluctantly, allowing the officers to enter my living room. Simone followed immediately, Leona trailing behind her with her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a woman who'd finally realized the true cost of the choices she'd made.
Now then, the officer said, taking out his notepad. Let's start from the beginning.
Ms. Green, you claim this woman kidnapped your stepdaughter. Absolutely. Simone straightened her shoulders, putting on what I recognized as her reasonable authority figure performance. I came home from work to find my front door broken and Aliyah gone. When I called around, neighbors said they saw an older woman forcing the girl into a truck. Forcing. I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. Officer, I rescued my granddaughter from child abuse. That's what she keeps saying, Simone said, shaking her head sadly. But the truth is she's never approved of my marriage to her daughter. She's been looking for any excuse to cause trouble. The officer turned to Aliyah, who was standing close enough to me that I could feel her trembling. Young lady, did this woman force you to come with her?
No, sir.
Aliyah's voice was barely above a whisper. She saved me. Saved you from what? Aliyah glanced nervously at Simone, then back at the officer. From freezing to death on the front porch. The second officer looked up from his notepad. Explain that. I accidentally burned the turkey this morning. Simone made me sit outside in the cold to think about my actions. I was out there for over 4 hours in 15-degree weather. She's exaggerating, Simone said quickly. It was maybe an hour, and she was dressed warmly. An hour. I stared at her. Officer, I have witnesses. My granddaughter was sitting on that porch in a thin sweater and jeans when I arrived at 3:15. She'd been there since 11 in the morning. The first officer looked at Simone with new interest. Ma'am, is it true you made the young woman sit outside as punishment? Briefly, yes, but she's making it sound worse than it was. In freezing weather for several hours? Simone's confident facade began to crack slightly. Look, sometimes teenagers need firm discipline. Her mother and I agreed that. Mom didn't agree to anything, Aliyah said, her voice getting stronger. She just didn't stop you. All eyes turned to Leona, who had been silent throughout the entire exchange. She stood by the doorway like she was ready to run, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Ma'am, the officer prompted. What's your version of events? Leona looked like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that whatever she said next would determine whether she stepped back to safety or plunged into the abyss. Her hands shook as she glanced between Simone's expectant face and Aliyah's hopeful eyes. Mrs. Green, the first officer said gently, we need to know what really happened today. Simone moved closer to her wife, and I could see the subtle intimidation in her posture, the way she positioned herself to loom over her, the warning look in her eyes. Tell them, honey. Tell them how your mother has been poisoning Aliyah against our family. The officer noticed it too. Ma'am, please step back and let your wife speak for herself. Leona's voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. Aliyah did burn the turkey this morning. And? The officer prompted. And Simone was upset. Very upset. Her eyes darted to her wife, then quickly away. She said Aliyah needed to learn responsibility. By sitting outside in freezing weather? Leona nodded miserably. Simone said it would teach her to be more careful. How long was she outside, ma'am? Another glance at Simone, who was standing rigid with barely controlled anger. Since around 11. Until when? Until my mother arrived. Her voice was getting smaller with each word. Around 3:15. The officer did quick math in his head. Over 4 hours in 15-degree weather. She's making it sound worse than it was, Simone interjected. She could have come inside any time if she'd apologized and shown some remorse. No, she couldn't, Leona said suddenly, and everyone turned to stare at her. You locked the door. You told me not to let her in no matter what. The silence that followed was deafening. Simone's face went white, then red, then back to white. Leona, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. What are you doing? I'm telling the truth. She looked at Aliyah, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. For once in 3 years, I'm telling the truth. The officer leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Green, has this kind of punishment happened before? Yes. The word came out in a rush, like she'd been holding it back for years. She's made Aliyah sleep in the garage, in the basement. She's locked her out of the house overnight. Her voice grew stronger with each confession. She controls when Aliyah can eat, when she can shower, when she can speak at the dinner table. Leona, shut up. Simone's mask finally slipped completely. You have no idea what you're doing. You'll destroy everything we've built. What we've built. She turned on her with sudden fury. What have we built except fear and misery? Look at my daughter. Look what you've done to her. I watched Aliyah's face transform as her mother finally stood up for her. 3 years of doubt and self-blame seemed to melt away as she realized that someone else could see the truth of what she'd endured. The first officer stood up and moved toward Simone. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back. This is ridiculous. Simone backed toward the door. You're going to arrest me based on the word of a bitter old woman and her delusional daughter? Based on the physical evidence and multiple corroborating testimonies about child endangerment, the officer said calmly, pulling out his handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. As they read Simone her rights and led her toward the door, she turned back to Leona with pure venom in her eyes. You'll regret this betrayal. You'll lose everything. The house, the money, everything. You'll be nothing without me. I'd rather be nothing than watch you hurt my daughter, she said, and for the first time in years, she sounded like the strong woman who'd raised Aliyah on her own. The door closed behind the officers and their prisoner, leaving the 3 of us alone in my living room. Leona collapsed into a chair and started crying. Not the quiet, careful tears she'd shed before, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from years of buried pain. Aliyah went to her immediately, kneeling beside her chair. Mom, it's okay. It's over now. I'm so sorry, she whispered through her tears. I should have protected you. I should have been stronger. You were strong tonight, I said, settling back into my chair by the fireplace. When it mattered most, you chose your daughter over your wife. That took real courage. The fire crackled peacefully in the grate, and for the first time in months, my house felt like a real home again. Not just because my family was safe, but because the truth had finally been spoken, and justice was being served. Aliyah looked up at me from where she knelt beside her mother's chair. What happens now, Grandma? Now we heal, I said simply. We take our time, and we heal. 4 months later, the morning sun streamed through my kitchen window as Leona flipped pancakes on the griddle, and Aliyah sat at the table reviewing her acceptance letter from a University of Michigan's engineering program. Full scholarship, she said for the 10th time that week, still not quite believing it. They're actually paying me to go to school. That's what happens when you're brilliant and work hard, Leona said, sliding a stack of pancakes onto her plate. She looked different now. Stronger, more confident. The part-time job at the local library had given her independence she'd never had before, and the divorce settlement had provided enough money for her to start over. Your grandfather would have been so proud, I said, settling into my chair with my coffee. The kitchen felt alive in a way it hadn't since George died, full of conversation and laughter and the comfortable chaos of a real family. Leona had moved in permanently after Simone's conviction. The guest room had become her space, and we'd converted the basement into a proper bedroom for Aliyah. Not a punishment cell like at Simone's house, but a comfortable retreat with good heating and windows that actually opened. Mom, are you sure you don't mind us staying here indefinitely? Leona asked, joining us at the table. I know you're used to your independence. Independence is overrated, I said, meaning every word. Family is what matters. Besides, who else is going to make sure Aliyah doesn't burn down the kitchen when she tries to cook? That was one time, Aliyah protested, laughing, and the fire was very small. The phone rang, and Leona answered it. Burke Residence. Oh, hi, Mia. Yes, she's here. Guitar practice at 4? Sure, I'll tell her. She hung up and turned to us. Your friend Mia wants to know if you're still planning to practice for the talent show. The talent show? I raised an eyebrow. You didn't tell me about any talent show. Aliyah grinned, looking more like the confident young woman she was supposed to be. It's nothing big. Mia and I are doing an acoustic set. Couple of classic songs you'd probably recognize. I'll be in the front row, I promised. After breakfast, I found Leona in the living room arranging new family photos on the mantel alongside the pictures of George. There was one from Aliyah's high school graduation that we'd missed because of the Simone situation, one from our fishing trip last month, and one from Christmas morning, our first real family Christmas in years. Any word from Simone? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Her lawyer called yesterday. The anger management therapy is going well, apparently, but she lost her job at the hospital. She shrugged, not looking particularly sympathetic. She's moving back to Cleveland to live with her sister. Good. The farther away, the better. I feel sorry for her sometimes, she admitted. But then I remember what she did to Aliyah, and the feeling passes pretty quickly. That afternoon, while Aliyah was at guitar practice, Leona and I worked in the garden, preparing the soil for George's vegetable patch. Spring was coming early this year, and there was something hopeful about planting seeds and planning for growth. Mom, Leona said, pulling weeds with focused determination, I need to thank you again for what you did. If you hadn't come that day. You don't need to thank me, I said, turning over a stubborn clump of earth. I was just doing what any grandmother would do. No, you weren't. You risked everything to save her. You could have been arrested, charged with kidnapping. But I wasn't. Truth has a way of winning out in the end. She smiled, wiping dirt from her hands. George used to say that. He was a smart man. Smarter than me, anyway. That evening, we settled into our routine. Dinner together, followed by whatever game show or movie happened to be on television. It wasn't exciting or glamorous, but it was exactly what we all needed. Predictable, peaceful, safe. Aliyah had her guitar out, quietly practicing in the corner while Leona worked on a crossword puzzle and I read the newspaper. Normal family activities that had seemed impossible just a few months ago. Grandma, Aliyah said during a commercial break. I've been thinking about changing my major. From engineering to what? Social work, maybe counseling. She set down her guitar and looked at me seriously. I want to help other kids who are going through what I went through. I felt a surge of pride so strong it almost took my breath away. This young woman, who had every right to be bitter and angry, wanted to use her experience to help others. That's a fine goal, I said. Your grandfather always said the best way to heal from pain is to help others avoid it. Did he really say that? He did, along with about 1,000 other pieces of wisdom I should have listened to more carefully. As the evening wore on and Leona dozed in her chair, Aliyah and I stepped out onto the back porch to look at the stars. The night was clear and cold, but nothing like that terrible Thanksgiving when I'd found her freezing on Simone's doorstep. Ready for fishing season to open? I asked. Can't wait. Think we'll catch anything bigger than last year? With your luck. Probably catch a whale. We stood in comfortable silence, 2 generations of Burke women who'd found their way back to each other through crisis and truth. In a few months, Aliyah would head off to college, and eventually she'd build her own life and family. But the foundation was solid now, built on honesty and protection, and the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything in return. "Grandma," Aliyah said as we headed back inside. "Yeah, baby. Thank you for coming to get me. Thank you for being worth saving." The house was warm and bright as we locked up for the night. 3 women who'd learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up when it matters most, telling the truth even when it's hard, and protecting the people you love, no matter what the cost. George would have been proud of all of us.